Today we're going to review the top 4 Cavalry combos for KVK Season 4 and beyond. We'll give you the best talents, review the best equipment, and also give you a little bit of guidance on investment order. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming and this video is sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms. And every time a new commander arrives in the game, I review the very best pairings for that type of commander. We recently got Joan of Arc Prime, and so here we are reviewing the very best Cavalry combos now that she has arrived into the meta. And if you like guides designed to help you get value and smash your enemies, keep in mind that I have over 1,700 dedicated videos to making you a better player in Rise of Kingdoms, so please do consider subscribing to the channel and throwing a like on the video. Thank you for that. As is the case in the majority of my videos, there's going to be timestamps in the description to jump to whichever portion you're most interested in. The place we're going to start is reviewing the Cavalry commanders and pairings that don't quite make the cut. Then we'll review the very best pairs. I'll talk a little bit about investment advice and then equipment. So let's start with just the Cavalry commanders. There's so many viable pairs for Cavalry right now. By the way, I think Cavalry might actually be the most versatile, best open field troop type currently in the game. I mean, Cavalry not only move faster, but there's just so many damn good Cavalry commanders that are highly accessible. I want to review every single one and talk about why these commanders are generally runners-up to the list. And I'll go very quickly. First, I want to mention Joan and Jadwiga. Both of them are garrison commanders. I do not think they are premium for the open field. Premium open field commanders have march speed, big debuffs, big area of effect damage, and both Jadwiga and Joan do not have these things. Now, Bertrand is an interesting one because he is actually shockingly tanky in the open field. In many ways, he's like a better Attila. But the problem with Attila and the problem with Bertrand is that they don't do area of effect damage. They do, I mean, in Bertrand's case, have a very slight rage debuff. But the majority of what these commanders are doing is reducing the damage you take. And if an enemy does hit your very tanky march, you will be very happy with how long it lives. But I prefer big AoE debuffs, AoE damage to the single target sort of stuff going on with Bertrand and also with Takeda. So neither of those commanders are going to appear on today's list. Now, Chandragupta isn't in the top commanders, but he is one of the stronger Cavalry commanders in the game. And I want you to think about Chandragupta as a weaker version of Nevsky. For example, Nevsky elevates skill damage dealt. Well, Chandragupta increases all damage dealt for a short window of time. Nevsky is going to debuff the target with defense. Chandragupta is going to do a health and defense reduction. Chandragupta has some tanky stats. He's got 20% health. Really, in any of the situations where you would have considered Nevsky, you'd say Chandragupta would be a worse, but still a good substitution. Now, from here, I want to talk briefly about a couple leadership commanders that work really well with a lot of cavalry, and that includes both Honda Tadakatsu and the less premium equivalent, that would be Mehmed. Of course, he is easier to obtain, and his museum buff is a really nice power boost on any pairing you're going to make with Mehmed. Mehmed would need to be the secondary, Honda would need to be the secondary, but both of them make you bring more troops, do more skill damage, and do area of effect damage, which is exactly where you want to be. So these are actually really solid additions to a lot of Cavalry combos. Now from here, we can go back to the pure Cavalry and get a look at Minamoto, who is actually shockingly good for what he is and what he costs to obtain. Yes, $200 and having the VIP is actually a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but Minamoto does work really well. He does very high single target damage and also has a nice defense boost from his museum buff, that's KVK Season 4 and beyond, and he makes the target take more all damage, which is extremely powerful. So Minamoto does work in a lot of places. He is a high damage commander you want to put behind somebody that generates a lot of rage, like a support tree commander, like XY, who has a rage reduction. And on the topic of rage reductions, Khan is really unfortunate. He needs a museum buff to be relevant in KVK Season 4 and beyond. He's not going to make this list, and he won't be on this list until they actually put a darn relic on him. And even then, his power level is just not going to be as good as these top pairings we're going to give you. Now, one other leadership commander I do need to mention is Ethelfled. You see her all over the Osiris League top tier teams. And like, why is that when they have access to all these commanders? Why would they use her? It is because she does area of effect damage that is not reduced by the number of targets that you're hitting. When you look closely at other commanders that do area of effect damage, that damage is reduced for each additional target you hit. Not the case with Ethelfled, which is why you see a lot of Saladin Ethelfled in the early game, a commander that generates lots of rage from the support tree, pairs nicely with someone like Ethelfled who does big AoE that is not reduced by virtue of hitting lots of targets. She's a solid choice. And let's talk about Saladin now. If you are investing in Saladin, he is a very strong commander. I have used him up until Joan was released in the game. I was still using Saladin in my murder ball. And you see, I've got a lot of commander choices here. So Saladin is extremely strong. In fact, even at 5'5", 5'1", he is very, very good. He's not going to make the top list today because the power level of these commanders is simply higher. But if you worked on Saladin before KVK Season 3 has ended and you finish that project before you get to Season of Conquest, I think you get a lot of value out of a Saladin primary. I can very highly recommend this commander for bringing a lot of tankiness and moderate utility to your open field brawling. Now, this brings us to one final commander before I get into the top list. That is going to be Attila. I personally think that Attila Takeda is a great way to inflict a lot of sev wounds on whatever you're hitting. Now, this is an open field list, so keep in mind that for city rallying, Attila Takeda is really good, but that's not what we're talking about here. Again, Attila Takeda doesn't fall into that AoE damage that I really like, big debuffs that I really like for an open field brawl. So I think Attila with Takeda is fine, but I don't think they're top tier. They're going to get you a lot of kills, but they're not going to be as good as other marches for just trying to clear the field, which brings us to our top 4 cavalry marches. And the number 4 march on the list is going to be XY with Honda Tadakatsu. You probably knew I was going to share this combo if you've been attending my live streams. Consider subscribing if you haven't already so you don't miss the next live stream. XY does a number of things very well. He reduces the rage requirement for your active skills, which means you're gonna fire off active skills faster. He's got a lower rage requirement and he reduces it, but he also increases your damage dealt the longer that you're in combat. Well, the reason that Honda pairs so well here is that Honda not only makes it so you bring more troops, which means you deal more skill damage, but as you start to lose those troops, Honda elevates your skill damage. So the magic of this pairing is that not only are you doing big AoE damage with a nice debuff, but also the longer you're in combat, the more skill damage you're going to deal. That really ramps up substantially. This is not a great combo for swarming flags and forts. Trust me, I would know. It was very painful. However, in the open field, it's an extremely strong combo, one that should not be overlooked. If you're looking for talents to use on your XY, I have experimented with a lot of builds. This is one that I'm playing around with now, but I think most people would simply recommend going all in on this build over here. You just go for extra rage gen, because for commanders that have a reduced rage requirement, like XY does, getting extra rage is just disproportionately good, even if some amount of time that rage is wasted, because there is a cap to the amount of rage you can generate in a turn. The XY Honda combo with this build, and really XY using this build with a lot of commanders. You could do XY Chandra, XY William, XY Saladin. I mean, there's a lot of ways to run this combo, but the number 4 is going to be XY Honda. Number 3 on the list is actually, there's 2 ways you could run this, and it's going to be an XY primary again. But now I'm going to recommend that you either use Joan or Nevsky as the secondary. And the power level on Joan and Nevsky is just so damn high. Now, according to polls that I put out in my live streams, 75% of you think that Nevsky is the better commander with Nevsky and Joan. So let's just talk about why the Nevsky XY combo, it's really XY Nevsky combo, the XY is the primary, works so well. There's a couple things going on. First of all, XY has no tankiness, whereas Nevsky brings a lot of tankiness. He has defensive stats, and he gets triggered defensive stats, and when you're surrounding targets, you take less damage. I mean, Nevsky is really powerful. In addition, Nevsky is boosting skill damage, and with a commander like XY, this is just extremely powerful. You're already going to do a lot of skill damage, and enhancing that even more is powerful. And the active skill is so strong, 2,300 damage factor. When you combine these two commanders together, they are extremely fun to use in the open field. Getting your skill cycles to go faster is just a cleaner experience for open field brawling. Now from here, we've got to talk about a commander that so far I have not mentioned, but he is one of the strongest cavalry commanders in the game, and that is William. Joan or Nevsky primary with a William secondary is extremely strong, and it is still funny to me how now that Joan is available in game, people are looking at William going like, wow, actually William's power level's through the roof, isn't it? And yes, William's power level has always been through the roof. This is why, if you're subscribed to the channel, you know I've been recommending for a long time that a 5.5, 5.1 William is extremely powerful. And although his area of effect damage is very narrow, when you land area of effect damage with William, not only do you do a lot of damage, not only do you make it so that bonus skill damage effects don't work, you also reduce their march speed, but more importantly, when you hit multiple targets, you generate rage for your team, and you give a defense boost. This is extremely powerful if you are bringing 5 marches to the open field, especially because this buff will prioritize your marches over your allies. So William, paired with either a Joan or Nevsky primary, is going to be absolutely through the roof. I'm going to talk more about the talents for Joan and Nevsky in just a minute, because I've got to review the #1 combo, which in my opinion is Joan primary, Nevsky secondary. I also could give you an argument for using Nevsky primary and Joan secondary. Either one is going to be really strong. I have used them both, and I'll talk about the pros and cons of each. These two commanders are so high power level right now. In fact, I used Joan in this unmaxed state in the open field in KVK, and I felt like my reports were indistinguishable from using expertise commanders. And that's how you know, that's how you know that Joan Prime is just insanely strong. So let's talk about these two commanders and why they work together so well. As I mentioned earlier, Nevsky is going to boost your skill damage dealt. This happens after you use an active skill. Keep in mind, this isn't when Nevsky uses his active skill. It's when either of the commanders in their pairing uses an active skill. So this means, and this is why, by the way, that if you use a Joan primary, you take advantage of a lot of things. First of all, she's going to do AoE damage. You're going to boost your team's damage dealt and also some rage gen. 3 targets get this benefit. But then Nevsky's skill damage boost kicks in. And so then Nevsky will do his big skill damage with the skill damage boost. And then when Joan of Arc does her extra attack with the Blessed, you're going to have the benefit still of Nevsky's skill damage boost. This combo in this order is extremely strong. It is very tanky. This is because of the support tree that Joan of Arc has available, and here is exactly the way I would invest in this tree. Now, if you care more about open field than swarming garrisons, take 1 point out of disarm and drop that in to emergency protection, and you will get a slightly better result. But this is generally the build that I would recommend for your Joan of Arc Prime. Now, the argument for using a Nevsky as the primary is also because of talents. Now, if we look at Nevsky, he's got the skill tree. And if you run this build with your Nevsky, which I think is the one build that you probably ought to use, then you are going to skill cycle faster than you would with your Joan. You're going to get your first skill cycle faster because of the possibility of this right over here, Feral Nature, giving you some rage, getting your whole engine going faster. You do lose out on a little bit of tankiness, but you're gaining damage. That damage not only comes from the skill cycles going faster, however, clarity is really nice. After using an active skill, increase skill damage dealt by 6% for the next 6 seconds. Well, with Joan, you're going to be firing off active skills all the time. Her extra activation of the active skill will trigger clarity, which is really good. You know, I can't tell you for sure which of these is really the better primary just yet, but I know that pairing them together is insane. I will say that I personally am currently using the Joan primary, and I'm running this in Canyon, and I actually have her in the front lane tanking. And this is because Joan actually boosts your normal attack damage by a lot. She's got a number of things that are going to elevate your normal attack damage, which is a sneaky way of increasing the power level of a commander without making them better at swarming a garrison, at least not substantially better. Remember that the way normal attack damage works is that's the damage you deal to the thing you're directly targeting, and anytime somebody targets you, you deal counterattack damage back. So normal damage boosts enhance both of those situations. If you wanted to bring 2 cavalry marches into the open field, here's what you're going to bring. In my opinion, and you could mix this up because these cavalry commanders are so damn good in so many configurations, you would run XY Joan and Nevsky William. It splits the tankiness and the damage in a way that's really nice, and you're not really sacrificing much, if anything. If you want to run 3 cavalry combos, let me tell you, you got a lot of options for how you could do this, but here's what I think would be the best way to run it. I think the best way you could run it would be XY with Honda Tadakatsu, you'd run Joan with Nevsky, and you'd run Chandragupta with William. Now, there's a lot of swap-ins you could do here. Your XY you could pair with Honda or Mehmet or Minamoto. Your Chandragupta you could pair with, like, Saladin, for example, instead of the William. There's a lot of ways you could run it, but I think that best way of running it is the XY Honda, Joan Nevsky, Chandra William, and that is just so strong. And Chandra's a commander that's actually really good for swarming garrisons, which I know most people are not actually in the market for doing that, but I'm just mentioning it because, man, if I still had him expertised, I would be using him for sure for that garrison swarm situation. Let's get a look at the equipment you could use, and I know I've got some pretty solid stuff here. The best of the best, in my opinion, is going to be the Ash of the Dawn, that's not the set item, and also Navarre's Control for your gloves, that's also not a set item. Then you go for set boots, set chest, all at the legendary tier, and then you'd have a crit sword, that's the KVK sword, and the crit KVK helmet. That would be the best of the best. However, if you don't have the sword crit and you don't have the helmet crit, because honestly, like, very few people will, then for armor, I actually think this is better. If you don't have crits on either of those things from the KVK stuff, this is a better set because the 4-piece set bonus actually gives you some extra counterattack. So that's why I put the iconics on this particular set, and you use the Cav weapon and Cav set helmet instead of the KVK helmet and KVK weapon. This is an amazing set, and in most cases, I think Horn and Ring is the way to go. But let me give you some budget options because this is insane. This is my restart account, a strong but much more humble version compared to my main. And I've gone for 2 very important legendaries, the set boots and the set chest on Cavalry. This is because you want to stat swap into health, especially if you're using Joan of Arc, who really doesn't have much defensive capability. In order to get a lot of extra health, the 2-piece bonus also gives you extra health. You could make the set helmet, which I think is a great choice. Alternatively, I went the route of making the KVK helmet, and those are really solid upgrades at the legendary tier. But at the epic tier, you can see I'm still using these 3 items, which you could hold on to and not upgrade for a long time. That includes Heart of the Saint, giving defense, very strong. You can get Gladiator, giving health, very strong. And then also Iset Sufferance, little bit of attack, little bit of health. I really like the value of these particular items, and you could stick with these epics for an extremely long time. You do want to start to make legendary items at some point on your commanders, because then you can drop iconic crystals, as I've started to do on these boots over here. They give you some extra base stats. But to go slightly more budget here, if we get a look at your equipment options, there are a number of things you can do instead of the extravagant things that I've made, such as, for example, the blue helmet for Cavalry is really great. You get the talent on this thing, and it's 8% defense. It's tankiness, it's a lot of stats, it's not a lot of materials. Similarly, at the epic tier, you could stick with the Dark Lord's Blessing. Again, I get that you got to get patterns and materials, and it takes a while to make these legendaries. The Dark Lord's Blessing is actually really great. Defense is very good. Okay, this is a much easier pattern to obtain, so you can start there. At the boots, I used the attack boots for a very long time. This works. It's fine. An even more budget way to go would be to go with Windswept. You could also do Windswept Chest. I think, however, the defensive stats are better. But if you go for the 2-piece bonus on the Windswept, that's chest and boots, that ain't so bad, okay? It's going to give you a little bit of stats, it's health at least, and a little bit of march speed. And march speed ain't half bad, man. So for the cost of the materials, the blues are actually really good for the chest and for the boots. But for the 3 epics I showed you, the Gladiator Legs, the Isset Sufferance Gloves, and the Heart of the Saint, those are really good. Those are epics you want to aspire to make and then keep. In terms of your investment order for cavalry commanders, I think that my audience in live streams has made it really clear. I've polled multiple times, and 75% said Nevsky is the priority. So the 75% of people would do Nevsky, then Joan of Arc, if you want to go for cavalry commanders. And I think that's a solid ordering if you're in the market for cavalry commanders. I do want to remind you, however, that I made a very detailed guide talking about the strategy for which commander you should invest in next for your account. So if you want to see that video, there's going to be a card in the end screen in just a minute. It's going to be right over here. Check that one out. And if you want to see my overall investment order guide, taking into account all the other types of commanders that are in the game right now, my investment tier list, which is extremely popular, is going to be right over here.